Hello. Now, if you're watching this is not the two Ronnies. This is Political Frenemies, and this is the show where two friends, a Conservative and a Liberal Democrat, talk politics. I'm Chris Newton. I am an academic and I'm a former Conservative defence policy advisor. And with me is Mathew Hulbert, Liberal Democrat activist and former councillor. Hello, Mathew. How are you doing?
Hi, Chris. So are you suggesting that I would be Ronnie Barker?
Well, given that I'm much shorter, then I probably would be Ronnie Corbett by default. So
you're much shorter and I'm much fatter. So yeah, I think we probably got that the right way around. Although I have to say, a lot thinner than I was before my recent illness. I don't advocate illness as a way of losing weight, but that is what's happened in my case. So I guess in that sense, that's one positive that's come out of it all. But anyway, there we are. How are you, Chris?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, I should say for people wondering about the two Ronnies reference, we're both wearing glasses now. So well, I've always worn glasses, but Mathew, you're looking very good with the glasses now. So suits you.
Thank you. And these are actually my prescribed ones, because I know last week I was wearing some, but those were just a pair that we got so that I could at least see something whilst I was waiting for these. But yeah, I've got these are my main ones, and then I've got new reading ones as well. But so yes, we're certainly representing glasses wearers.
Yeah, we're very inclusive, and yes, us glasses wearers do need to be represented.
And of course, Chris, you love inclusivity and diversity and equality. You love all that stuff.
Of course I do. Yeah. All the time. Yeah, can't get enough of it. But I'm good to answer your question. I'm good. We're in British summertime now. Winter's behind us. Days are longer. I'm happy. I'm very glad that we can now look forward to warmer, longer days. So I'm made up. And
absolutely no, it really cheers you up when it's nice weather and it's nice and bright, and yeah, absolutely love that. And what a political week, Chris.
Yeah, it's a really big political week, and today what we're going to be discussing is Donald Trump. Who else? We're initially going to discuss his presidency more generally, because because of our break we haven't had an opportunity to talk about everything that Donald Trump has done, but we are going to focus on his announcement this week on tariffs as well, and in particular, as this is a British political podcast, the impact on the UK, what impact it has for politics and the different political parties. So that's the agenda for today. Let's get on with it, shall we? So yeah,
and we should just say, Chris, before moving along into the main thrust of the podcast, that thanks to everyone for joining us again. We really, as we said last week, we really are thrilled to be back, and please do all the internety things. However you're either watching us or listening to us, please like, please subscribe, please comment, please recommend to your friends, please follow us on Twitter at @PolFrenemies. We really need you to do all of that stuff, especially now we're back. People might just have forgotten about us. I don't know how they could, but they might just have. And so we need to get the word out again, don't we, Chris?
Yeah. So please, do all of that, and also, as I said last week, we are moving on to a new format, much shorter podcasts, and we're focusing on one big question, usually inspired by the week's news. But if there's a slow news week, then we might talk a broader sort of political question. So and today we're going to talk Trump and his tariffs. So without further ado, let's do this. Okay, so as you mentioned, big political week, a big economic week as well. Donald Trump this week unveiled his tariff strategy. He placed tariffs on whole list of countries, and in relation to us and what in terms of the UK and what's how we're impacted and what we're interested in particular is that Donald Trump imposed a 10% tariff on the UK more generally, and he imposed a 20% tariff on the European Union, and we might want to get into that a bit later. Of course, earlier Trump had already imposed a 25% tariff on car imports. So a big news, big shift in American economic policy. But before we get on to tariffs more specifically, of course, we now have 2 to 3 months of the second Trump presidency. A lot has happened over those 2 to 3 months. It seems like 3 years as opposed to to 3 months. And I just want to get your take, Mathew, on what you've seen so far from Trump, and what do you make of it all, and what do you make of what he's done so far?
Well, Chris, I mean, I think it's even worse than I'd imagine it would be. I kind of think of it as Trump on steroids. I mean, I think in his first presidency, and that wasn't great either from my perspective, but I think he did have some folks around him who were prepared to kind of moderate him as much as they were able to. You still might be able to say that it wasn't very much, but at least a bit. Whereas I think everyone around him now in his administration in the White House are Trump acolytes, or people who know that that they've got to support him if they want to keep their new very rarefied positions in government in the United States, and so everything revolves around him. Now, you may say any president, everything revolves around them. Well, yeah, of course, to an extent. The power is placed in the one person in their system. I think that's one of the faults of the American system, if I can put it that way. I'm sure there's faults with the parliamentary system as well, but I think there are more checks and balances. And I even heard, and I don't know how true this is, but I even heard someone say, I think on CNN this week, that Trump often doesn't get up until it's kind of past midday, and so nothing can happen in the mornings because he feels that if he's not up and around to be making decisions, then nothing can happen. As I say, I don't know if that's kind of a story to represent how people feel about Trump, or if it's true. No doubt we'll find out in the biographies of the future. But he seemed. I think there's a great irony about Trump. I was thinking this earlier today, that he has lots of support from working class folks and especially working class men. They're some of his biggest supporters, and yet I think it could be argued that a lot of what he does is not going to aid them. In fact, is going to harm them economically, and that most of what he does is to aid very successful people like himself. Now, I say very successful people like himself. There's actually an argument to be made that he's not very much of a successful businessman either. But he's certainly well off from what we're led to believe. And so I think that actually, we saw in his speech on Wednesday, and I know we'll get into it, but we saw in this speech on Wednesday when he was talking about the tariffs that he'd invited a lot of what we tend to call blue collar workers to attend his speech, and they were whooping and hollering. But I thought to myself, they could be some of those who are most harmed by what he's doing. But a bit like with Boris Johnson here, to an extent at least, people almost factor in that what he's doing may harm them, and yet still support the person. I can't understand that, Chris, but maybe you have a response to that. What do you think?
One question I would put to you is there anything positive that has come out of the past few months in terms of your direct question? And I do have some degree, especially with regards to the tariffs, and we'll talk in more detail about the tariffs. Of course, the counter argument to that is that the whole point of Trump imposing these tariffs is that he's going to protect jobs. He's going to bring jobs back to jobs that have been sort of outsourced to other countries in the past, and industries and companies that have been outsourced to other countries. He's bringing those jobs back. He's protecting jobs in America as well, and he's going to lead a revival of manufacturing in America, and ultimately restore American industry and manufacturing. Is that now? I'd say that there's some problems with that argument, especially in terms of the increase in prices which the tariffs will inevitably make. But that has always been historically the argument for tariffs, which is going to protect jobs. There's going to be more jobs for American workers. So there's two questions there. Firstly, do you buy any of that logic with regards to tariffs and protectionism, and can you find anything remotely positive from the last 3 months that perhaps either in terms of governmental or politically, that Britain could potentially learn, or has the whole thing been a sort of a disaster?
I mean, I think I'll have to rack my brains during this podcast and be thinking for any kind of positive that. So leave that with me. I'll try and think before the end of before we end today. But well, I mean, we'll have to see what happens. I mean, certainly, if the markets are anything to go by, it's been fairly disastrous already. Whether that is an indicator of what will happen with jobs, we'll have to wait and see. But I think the American middle class and the American working class, this could significantly harm them. And so that's the. I mean, Keir Starmer, and obviously he's trying to be diplomatic, and I understand why. He's the prime minister, and he for good or ill, he has to work with the president of the United States and the American administration. But Keir Starmer was trying to say that, look, Donald Trump has his mandate. That's what he said he was going to do this. He's now doing it. He clearly got a mandate to do it from a majority of the American people, and so he's doing what he said he'd do. And Starmer in response said, "But I'm going to do, what Starmer argues he has a mandate to do, which is to, as he would see it, represent Britain's national interests." And obviously we can talk about what our best national interest is in regards to this, whether it's responding with tariffs of our own, or whether it's, as the government sees it, trying to get some kind of deal with the United States that would help offset some of this. I mean, it's interesting the different responses, isn't it, from countries? I think most countries are trying to respond in that way, but actually, I don't know if you saw, Chris, but the speech from, or at least a clip of the speech from Mark Carney, the new Liberal Prime Minister of Canada, the successor to Justin Trudeau. And of course, Canada's about to head into a general election. So obviously that has to be factored in on this. But he responded, at least rhetorically, responded very firmly to the United States, and basically said that it is not at the moment, at least, the friend that it once was to Canada. Now, to hear a Canadian Prime Minister say that of an American president, no one would ever have dreamed that would ever be said. But that's the situation that Donald Trump has created with his nearest neighbour. And of course, he's been talking this silly talk, as I would say, of claiming that he wants Canada to be the 51st state of the US and all of this nonsense. And also, of course,
I would agree with that.
All
of that talk is very strange. To talk is one thing to talk in that way about enemies, but to talk in that way about allies, that's right. that's new. To talk in that firmly. Now we've had our difficulties with the EU as well, and I would argue that that some EU countries have been the precursors to that. But to talk about Canada being the 51st state, we're going to take Greenland one way or the other. So, yeah, it's very strange, and he's acting very robustly towards allies and very leniently at the moment towards his adversaries. Now, whether there's any degree of whether he's going to put it in wrestling terms, because I know you like wrestling, Matthew, but I don't know whether at some point Trump's going to do a face turn and start doing the other way and saying, well, this was a ruse all along and this was just a means of trying to wrong foot China and Russia and so forth. But it's still a very strange strategy, and the strategy of getting this madman strategy of getting other countries to do what he wants them to do. Well, it's not working at the moment. We'll have to see with regards to the tariffs whether countries will respond positively and negotiate some form of deal. At the moment, people are talking about reciprocal tariffs. So he's not actually working, and it's the same with Russia as well, with Ukraine as well. If there is some kind of strategy for Russia to get them to seriously negotiate, well, that hasn't worked as well. So
what did you, Chris? What did you make of his call? I think it was just yesterday, actually, for on Truth Social, his social media site, for interest rates to be cut in the United States. Do you think that, which is obviously independent of his decision making, do you think that the governor of the central bank will feel pressure or not as a result of that?
I mean, possibly. I mean, that's something for the economic expert. This is the problem with Trump's unpredictable approach, which again is all part of kind of trying to wrong foot your adversaries or the person you're negotiating with. You don't know what he's going to do, but the problem is that it doesn't build a kind of a stable environment, and it isn't something that's preferable to your allies, because one thing that decision makers, whether it's bank governors or whether it's international investors, want, and they would say this to you all the time, is that they want business certainty. They want to know where the ground lies. They want to know where the ground lies in years to come. You can't do that with a president like this, which changes his mind. And he's imposing tariffs today, but he said that this is an opening gambit, and the tariff policy could change for various countries at some point in the future. It's a very difficult environment for countries to make the right call, and for businesses to make the right call. And again, in terms of inward investment into the United States, America's a big market, is always going to be attractive for overseas investors, but there might be some hesitancy there, given the unpredictability of both in terms of the trading environment, but also the economic environment as well. So one question I would like to ask you: has Starmer made the right decision in terms of not doing a Carney, not blowing his top off straight away, and taking a calmer attitude and seeing whether he can get Trump into a more favorable position, or should he go more robust? Would Trump actually listen more if Starmer had a more robust approach and attitude to what Trump is doing? Given that, yes, we got off lightly in terms of the 10% tariff, which is the lowest tariff that we could get. But if you look at the balance of trade between the United States and the UK, the US has a trade surplus with us. So from that point of view, yes, thank God we got off lightly. But was that tariff imposed on us actually fair? And you could say, well, based on the surplus, based on the balance, it's not actually fair. Maybe Starmer ought to point that out to Trump.
Well, I mean, I think Starmer is right in what he said the other day, in that a trade war, a tariff war, helps no one. But countries are taking different, having different responses to this. I mean, China has clearly responded by imposing significant tariffs itself, and so now whether you say that is China responding with strength, or whether you say that ultimately helps neither country, is up for political debate, obviously. I mean, I think in terms of Starmer's response, it has quite a lot to do with, as these things always do, with domestic politics, that he wants to be seen clearly as someone with a calm head, someone who doesn't respond explosively, someone who considers things, and then comes up with an approach. But if ultimately this Labour government doesn't get the deal that it hopes to get with the United States, then Starmer and Jonathan Reynolds and Rachel Reeves and all the rest of them may end up looking very silly. So, I mean, this is a big gamble for them, both in terms of, most importantly for our economy, but also for them politically, running into the next few years. So they really do need to get a good deal from America. If not, I think they'll face significant trouble and will plunge further in the polls. So we'll see what happens with that.
How likely do you think that will? How likely do you think that will happen? That Starmer will.
I mean, who knows? I mean, I think with Trump as well is that sometimes that he'll wake up one day and think one thing, and we'll wake up the next day and think the polar opposite to that. And so, as you've said, you get no consistency from him in that respect. There'll probably be a deal that gets over the line, and then it'll be for us all to judge whether we think that it's good enough or not. In terms of, I mean, I guess we have got off lightly with the 10%, but that's still 10%. It's still going to affect our businesses, and of course, there's still the 25% on car imports into the United States, which is obviously significantly more. So, I'm not sure I'm entirely with this thing that, oh well, whether it was Starmer or whether it was just what Trump decided, that this 10%, is kind of some great thing. Yeah, it's good that it wasn't any more than that. And I know that you're going to say, Chris, that it's thanks to the Brexiteers that we're not part of the EU, and that therefore we're not part of the 20%. So let's just get that out of the way first off.
How do you know I was going to say that?
Well, indeed, but I thought this still isn't great. I mean, this will still hit our companies and may well lead to job losses. So, I mean, this is really serious. And yeah, of course, we talk about the politics of this, but ultimately, this will affect real people, real businesses, real employers, real employees. And that is really, really serious. And of course, in terms of the EU and other countries that have had larger tariffs, this will seriously and even more so affect their businesses and their consumers and their employees. So, I think the trouble sometimes in the media is that this is almost portrayed as like a game, but it's not a game. It's really serious.
Yeah, and yeah, people will be affected one way or the other, whether it's through job losses or whether it's just through general prices and so forth.
And so, Chris, can I ask you? I mean, do you think that this is the end of the so-called special relationship? I mean, I've kind of always had a problem with this anyway, because I think that it's been it goes back to the Churchill days and all of that. But I sometimes wonder whether it has always been a special relationship. I mean, I was a big Joe Biden fan, but I think he was personally much more a fan of the Republic of Ireland than he was the UK. And there were often questions asked about Obama and whether we were really as close as we could have been. I mean, I personally think that probably the last time a prime minister and a president really, really got on was Blair and Clinton and Blair and W. Bush. So it's going back quite a while.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, the special relationship is really at the institutional level. So it's the level of It can often be the personal relationships between prime ministers and presidents, but what's at the real heart and the bedrock of the special relationship is the intelligence relationship, is the defense relationship, is the corporate, is the diplomatic relationship. And at the institutional level, that has been the case, regardless of what the presidents and prime ministers are. Now, you're right in terms of historically, the relationship has suffered ups and downs. So, a big low was the Suez Crisis in 1956. The United Kingdom didn't support the US in terms of Vietnam. The initial US response to the Falklands was more of a mediatory role rather than a full-blown sort of support to the British. But ultimately, in terms of not in terms of militarily, in terms of also culturally as well, we have a massive sort of cultural special relationship as well. We consume a lot of American TV and culture and film as well. But I think you're right in saying that certainly in recent presidents, Obama, Biden, especially the relationship has not been as close. And I think the outcome, although of the tariffs, although it's we have been, as you say, we have got off reasonably lightly. It doesn't fully reflect the tariff and the surplus situation that we have. But I think Trump's personal connections with Britain, the fact that he likes Britain, the fact that he's a supporter of Brexit, I think those will go in our favour. But of course there are real issues, for the UK in terms of of Trump's overtures towards Putin and Russia, the whole business with the signal chat and the whole the fact that the deeply secret intelligence and discussions regarding the strikes on the Houthis got out on this, well, they actually did it on this, the senior members of the administrations did it on this chat and it got out, and they joined. They opened an invitation out to a journalist to for this chat discussion. That raises significant questions for British policy about the degree of intelligence sharing. So it's mixed, as you stated in terms of the previous question, your previous answer. We'll have to see. It's still early days of this administration, and we'll have to see how he goes with all of this. But hopefully we can. He's always been positive towards the UK in the past. The meeting with Starmer went very well. He thinks very highly of the king. So hopefully all of these things will put us in good stead, and we can still maintain that good relationship. But where does that leave our policy and in particular our relationship? Should we still be American facing? Should we be closer to the EU? Should we look further afield and not perhaps put a lot of our eggs into the American basket? What do you think about kind of our foreign policy going forward in the light of all of this?
Well, I mean, you certainly won't be surprised to hear me as a Liberal Democrat say that I always think we should be closer to the EU. I think we should be very close to the EU. In fact, I think we should rejoin the EU. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But certainly, Ed Davey and the Lib Dems have been calling for us to be close to the EU. I mean, actually, and this used to be Tony Blair's phrase, and I thought he was right on this. That he said that at the time, and obviously we're part of the EU at the time, but he said that Britain should be the bridge between the EU and America. Now it's more difficult for us to be that now.
And Starmer's trying to do that.
Yeah. And so, I think because obviously, and this is just factually the case, Chris, that our biggest market remains the EU, remains the European single market, and so obviously that is very important for our businesses and for jobs and all the rest of it. And so I think to be pragmatic, of course, we need to try and be close to both. And that isn't always easy because, of course, the EU leaders and American leaders don't always agree. And there's obviously a significant amount of tension between Trump and the EU. I think that we need to. I mean, I've heard a claim this week, and I don't know what you think about this, Chris, but I've heard a claim this week that part of the reason why he only gave Britain the 10% and he gave the EU the 20% is because Trump and those around him want to see friction between Britain and the EU, and that this has as much to do with that political aim as it does anything to do with the economy. Now, again, I don't know if that's right or not. This is just a claim that I've heard made this week. But do you think that? I mean, I wouldn't put that past Trump and some of his acolytes, would you?
I don't know about that. I mean, people have worked out where the calculations have come from in relation. It wasn't based on the tariff rates. It was based on the deficit rates, and they did a calculation based on that. I mean, the Trump's attitude to Europe is, is interesting. You had the Vance speech with regards to free speech, which is one of the things I do have sympathy with. But with Vance, there are certain ways of putting things that I would do that speech a little bit more diplomatically and link it with if we can't if we can't practice our values at home, then we can't we will have difficulty defending them abroad. Whether or not they want to see friction, I don't know about that. I do think they want to see Europe spend more on defence and have their own and take more of the burden in terms of defence. And that is reasonable, that is a reasonable request. What is unreasonable, I think, is to pull the rug under the carpet of everybody straight away. I think everybody was expecting, yes, the Americans are going to face more towards the Pacific now, but we need some time in order to get our ducks in a row. We can't. It will take us a few years for us to build up our defense capability, for us to achieve what Trump wants us to achieve. So you were asking, sorry.
Just on that, what did you make of Marco Rubio's comments, committing or recommitting America to NATO this week?
Yeah, I mean, people have different interpretations as to what Trump's objectives are. Some say that he wants America to withdraw. He wants the whole world order to be different. He wants to blow it up, essentially. And then there are others that are saying Trump is doing this in order to get the Europeans to spend more, so that he can focus more on China. And hopefully it's the is the latter of those options. The problem with the way in which Trump has gone about it, and I appreciate that previous presidents' polite requests to European partners to spend more on defense has not worked, and so Trump is trying this approach. But the problem is that he's created so much ill will. He's created, especially in terms of withdrawing intelligence from Ukraine, in terms of some of the comments made towards European partners as well, particularly from JD Vance. He's created such mistrust and ill will that they've created a tension between the alliance and ultimately disunity in the alliance, to the points where people are seriously talking about, well, we can't trust the Americans, we need to have our own nuclear capabilities, we can't trust the Americans at all, so we need to develop our own kind of structures, our own ways of doing things. And so they've gone about it in a very kind of candid way, which might make the situation worse, not better, if their objective is indeed to just strengthen the alliance by getting the Europeans to spend more on defence. But in saying that, I do think the future of British foreign policy is also to, we've got the Commonwealth, we've got the Joint Expeditionary Force as well. We should make use of all of these different institutions that we're a part of. It's not just a case of the US and the EU. We've got influence in various different pies, and we don't make the use of, for example, the Commonwealth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think that's almost another debate in of itself, about the Commonwealth, because I think there are differing views about whether, it is something still fit for the modern age or not. And I have kind of conflicted views about that. So we might discuss that in one of our thematic weeks, Chris, and I look forward to doing that. But in terms of the British domestic political response, I think it's been really interesting. Obviously, as I say, the government thinks it has to be diplomatic, and I understand that. In terms of the Tories, well, you're perhaps best to talk about their how they have responded. I mean, do you think they've made much noise on this week or not?
I think they have, followed the tradition of oppositions, with the exception of Corbyn, in providing a united front and continuing the consensus in foreign policy that has existed, when moderate leaderships have taken control of the Labour and Conservative parties. I think there is an interesting dilemma for Conservatives in relation to this whole issue of globalization, free trade, neoliberalism, and its excesses, its strengths. Obviously, the big strength of free trade is cheaper goods, cheaper prices for ordinary workers. But of course, what Trump is reacting to, and what reform is reacting to as well, is the excesses of globalization, unmanaged mass immigration, the fueling of free trade, fueling our adversaries, and that happened during the British Empire days as well. That's the one consequence of free trade. The deindustrialization of Britain, and the fact that we don't make things, and that we've outsourced everything to other countries that make goods much cheaper, but without the labor laws that we have. And at some point, I would like to see some philosophical reckoning with the benefits and the excesses. This is one thing that the new leadership of the Conservative Party could explore, and actually come up with a coherent philosophy and a response to the growing backlash against globalization.
But you can't reverse globalization, can you, Chris? I mean, once that genie is out of the bottle, which it clearly is, I mean, that's it, isn't it?
Well, it's. I think the issue is how. It's very difficult to, and you're right there, but we can't carry on with a situation where British society, where there are divisions, there are problems, the working classes feel that they're left behind. So there has to be a policy responses to the excesses of globalization, and also the question with regards to the national interest as well, and whether trade with China, for example, whether that's to the extent that we have done, to what extent is that in the national interest as well. So I think this is something that needs to be looked at, and the challenge is how do you get the benefits of free trade whilst securing the national interest and securing what British working class people value in terms of traditional jobs and traditional culture, and have a coherent society. I think that's the major challenge. I have one question for you with regards to before we wrap up, with regards to the politics of all of this. Now, of course, Ed Davey has had, you know, a much different response to the Conservatives and Reform to this, and Reform has been pretty silent on this as well. And Ed Davey has taken a much a bit different approach, a more critical approach, and he's been very, you know, he's been very consistently anti-Trump. Is this, you know, would you agree with that approach? Do you think he should continue with this approach, and do you think this will yield benefits politically, you know, adopting this very stark and anti-Trump approach?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you know, I don't always agree with Ed Davey, as you know. So, you know, it's not as if I just trot out the party line. But actually, I do agree with him on this. I think. I mean, the first thing to say is that, of course, the Lib Dems are nowhere near government. So we're
Thank
you
God.
know, we're I knew you'd say that, Chris. That we're able to
Although,
take a position like this you know, without having to really think about the diplomatic niceties that governments have to obviously think about. But I think it is the absolutely right position for Ed Davey and my party to be taking, to be challenging the government from a robust position and saying, probably knowing that the government isn't able to actually do this, but saying that, you know, come on, you know, this is, you know, let's call a spade a spade. This is not a good person that is now occupying the Oval Office. This is, you know, a convicted felon and all of that, and this is someone that, you know, could do really great damage not only to his own economy but to the world economy, and indeed to us in the UK. And that we need to meet strength with strength. And there is an argument actually that all Donald Trump respects his strength. Now, depends what you see as strength. Maybe you see being diplomatic and trying to get some kind of deal and hoping things will work out. Maybe that is strength, but maybe it's not. But maybe actually, you know, Donald Trump only respects, you know, he's supposed to like the strongman type of politics, isn't he? You know, and is that what we're seeing from Keir Starmer? Well, that's a debate we can have. I think Starmer is probably taking the only position that he really realistically can take. But that doesn't mean that political parties like the Lib Dems and to a certain extent the Greens aren't going to challenge him on that. And so I think, you know, this is absolutely the right stance for Ed Davey to be taking. It's certainly a stance which has garnered attention. And ultimately, you know, as the leader of a smaller, albeit much bigger these days in terms of our number of MPs, but still not one of the two main parties. And so for us to, you know, we do have to try and get attention, and this is certainly one way of doing that. And I think you know, a good section of the British electorate will think that we're right in doing so. And so I think, and actually, I've been really interesting how Ed Davey has used his two questions at PMQs, and he seems to use one to attack Trump in some way, and then he'll go on a domestic matter for the second. And I personally think that's working out for him. He's getting two bites of the cherry, and he's using them to create to try and generate two different news stories and two different clips on the evening news. And I think that tends to be working out for him. So
I appreciate it. I appreciate his, you know, obviously Trump is hot topic and he's been consistently top of the agenda ever since he became president again. But God, every single week he attacks Trump, and I just think, God, please, 1 week, can you just change the record? For Christ's sake, you know, does. And although I do agree, I often sometimes agree with him these days because I'm very critical of Trump's approach to Russia. But God, every single week, I'm sorry, I'm just fed up with it. Sorry.
Well, I think we need to. I don't know, maybe next week, depending on what the news is. But I think at some point we need to devote some time to talking about the different approaches to PMQs, because and we won't get into it now, but I'm just going to mention it. That you know, I think Kemi Badenoch continues to be not very good at it. But we'll discuss that on a future week, perhaps.
But I do understand why Davey does it, because it's what, you know, it's ground that's completely open to him. So yes, yes, so he'd be foolish not to, from a left, you know, liberal left sort of political perspective. But I do think at some point he does need to talk about other other things as well.
Yeah.
But I think we got to wrap it up there. I think, as I say, we're doing shorter podcasts. It's been another really sort of interesting, fascinating topic, and I'm sure that we're going to talk about Trump many times over the coming weeks.
I am too.
He's always going to be he's always going to feature there, as you know, at the top of the agenda in most weeks, I think. But we will.
Can I just say,
Yeah.
Chris, that and you will have seen this if you follow us on our Twitter at Frenemies. But of course, folks now they can listen via all the podcast ways, and that's fantastic. But people, if they've got smart TVs, and I mean, who hasn't these days? Most people have. They can actually watch us on their TV.
Yeah, no, yeah. So if watching us on your phone or your computer screen isn't big enough, then you can see, you know, you can see all of our good looks and blemishes as well on the big widescreen screen as well. So yes, there are lots of different ways to engage with us and to watch and to listen to us. And of course, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on all of the podcasting platforms, as well as YouTube as well. So yeah,
Absolutely.
do listen to us, do watch us, and do spread the word as well. So we really do appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, we don't know what we're going to be talking about next week. It'll all depend what happens in news and in politics. I suspect this issue will still be a big one, but I think we'll probably try and talk about something else next week, depending, unless something really big happens on this front and we revisit this topic. But yeah, it's great to be back. As we said last week, we've really missed doing these podcasts, but as we said last week, if you caught us, obviously life events have meant that we've just not been able to do so, but we're really thrilled to be back. And yeah, so do all the internety things, and then please join us again next week.
Yeah, as I said, thanks very much for listening to us. Thanks very much for spreading the word, and it's goodbye from me,
and goodbye from me.
And do join us on the next Political Frenemies. Goodbye.